Well, I'm gonna give my camera, watching my camera here. How you guys doing? James, James with another video. And this time, I'm gonna go another little direction with this video. And first, anytime you talk on a political, social subject like race and politics, it's very, very sensitive. And then sometimes maybe your channel might get demonetized, like this one guy was saying. There's a white guy saying it, and it's not a very popular subject, but in all, what is, because it's like, what is truth? And so I'm about to show you a couple videos that I'm gonna start out, and I'm gonna kind of cut half through his video, and then I'm gonna give my interpretation of it and what is he trying to say. And then he's one of the second people I'm going to kind of point some things out. He makes some excellent points. So this guy's name is the Cynical Historian. He talks about systemic racism in America. Let's watch this channel.
Folks, it's that time of year again. Spring has sprung. As you can see, we're hard at work doing exterior details, getting cars ready to be cleaned up.
Hey, Cypher here, and that title's not going to inspire a bunch of idiotic comments. No way.
I'm in danger!
You know I'm going to need to, have a bit to drink. Cheers. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of civil conversation down there, because that's what happens when you talk about history on YouTube. Sarcasm aside, as King Richard I decrees, bigots get banned, and I will be especially heavy-handed on this episode. Beyond that, you know Team YouTube supports historical denialism and many other forms of bigotry, because it's profitable. So they'll inevitably demonetize this, possibly even age-restrict it, as they've done with so many other difficult histories before this. And I think this is a vitally important topic. Firstly, there's a difference between systemic and personal racism. Too many people say X isn't racist because some person isn't racist, or that black people can't be racist towards whites. Both examples conflate personal and systemic racism. I'm talking about the latter form, as in racism built into the system. Many folks who wave the Confederate flag sincerely believe it is not racist, merely a regional identifier.
It means everything to me. It's heritage, it's bloodline, it's respect. It's about North versus South. It's not about color or race.
But the symbol itself is racist regardless of whether the person flying it is. See the difference? Individuals being racist and a societal structure being racist are two very different things. Our society is still riddled with the legacy of Jim Crow, and it takes looking at how that developed throughout the last century to understand why. No, I'm not here to propose solutions, but to explain the problem. Keep in mind, though, systemic problems require systemic solutions. There's no such thing as systemic racism. You're not educational content. You're just a propagandist funded by Democrats. You're being even worse than usual, Crypto. Hey, hold on a second. Why do you have shorter hair than me? We're different characters. Okay, well, continue with your denialist tirade. The demon rats keep control over people like you, as in sheeple, because you people always have to be continually pushing this whole victimhood complex. Sure, there's some crazy racists out there, I'm not denying that, but we defeated Jim Crow like decades ago, bruh. Dude, we're a post-racial society, just like Martin Luther King actually wanted when he said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. You just wanted to divide us by skin tone. America isn't racist. You are for saying otherwise, dude. Oh, Crypto, you perfect straw man. Not only are there lingering effects of Jim Crow, your denialism serves to perpetuate it. Politicians since Ronald Reagan, who actually opposed Martin Luther King in his day, use that quote to continue their denialism, sometimes literally imposing the kind of racist policies they ardently deny. Systemic racism exists only in subtler ways than before the 1960s, and that is what this episode is about. Of course systemic racism exists. American politicians try to maintain white supremacy. That is all they do. They rig the entire system to keep people of color in subservient positions. You can sit there in your armchair pontificating about the glories of past civil rights. It sure doesn't have arms, it's a drum stool. But for those who experience racism, they know nothing has ever changed. Police brutality, housing discrimination, and mass incarceration are just more of the same by a different name. Cheka, that's not really what it is. Close, but no cigar. First, anyone can experience racism, obviously, especially considering this platform's user base. You can find just about any form of bigotry imaginable here, including people who are personally racist against whites, even openly for the sake of correcting systemic racism. Saying that white people are evil is obviously quite racist. But more importantly, while there are certainly bad actors, systemic racism is the legacy of overt oppression, not the continuance of it. Cheka is dishonestly conflating the tyranny of Jim Crow and slavery with today. To pretend we haven't significantly progressed is to deny the very nature of U.S. history. Ending those things were significant advancements worthy of praise, and no one should forget what it took to achieve them. From our bloodiest war to our most aspirational movement, and there are still many civil rights to achieve. But to pretend that the system is the same as it's always been is foolish to say the least. That kind of rhetoric is grievance-mongering, which only serves to misdirect outrage, to easily debunk claims, and destroy whatever goodwill a cause might have. But we must not discount the very real vestiges of those systems that remain in ours today. That's what systemic racism is, the creation of a lower caste of non-white Americans separated by their economic and social circumstances and kept in an inferior position through so-called colorblind laws and traditions that hinder people of color more than their white counterparts. This episode will be looking at systemic racism placed upon black people, but the burden of America's racist history is placed upon many more races. Also, remember, I can only show so much for the sake of brevity. If you'd like to learn more, there's a whole bibliography below as per usual. What we'll see is that systemic racism is not necessarily intentional, but it is there nonetheless, allowing for a caste unduly put in an inferior position.
Folks, will you help me start my campaign off strong by donating today? Every generation has a moment.
I'm doing no crap to you.
Jim Crow is dead, but it did not simply end in the 1960s. It was a system of segregation and disenfranchisement, both through de jure and de facto means. De jure may have ended, but de facto is a little more difficult to dislodge. That was only 60 years ago. Millions of people are still alive who can remember Jim Crow, and it has remnants. The Supreme Court made anti-miscegenation laws unconstitutional with Loving v. Virginia in 1967. Until that point, many states outlawed miscegenation, as in interracial relationships, especially marriage. Yet there remained a cultural taboo against interracial relationships. as a miscegenation. The first televised kiss between black and white people was a year later on Star Trek. A full-blown black and white relationship would not be depicted until 1975, with the Willis family in The Jeffersons. Yet tradition is a stubborn thing, and many people retain that color line by preference even today. Even in current-day media depictions, it's exceedingly rare to see white women in relationships with black men, due to the long-standing fears of black lasciviousness and the recent acceptance of a conspiracy theory about miscegenation somehow replacing white people. It's hateful, but so mainstream, especially among conservative media, that our culture simply accepts that it's normal to have mostly black people hanging out with black people and white people with our so-called own kind. We remain de facto culturally segregated and worsen that rift with conspiracism like lies about the Great Replacement. The Supreme Court also ruled that segregated schools were unconstitutional with Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, thereby finally counteracting the 1896 decision Plessy v. Ferguson that said that races could be separate but equal, and it takes time to integrate. In 1969, the court was still ordering that all deliberate speed be used to integrate. This led to a national debate over whether busing kids to integrate was a form of tyranny in and of itself, which is ultimately what halted urban integration efforts. As late as 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that even certain forms of voluntary integration plans were unconstitutional, which has left schools in the U.S. still extremely segregated as of 2021, leaving black children far more likely to be given a worse education than their white counterparts. Since schools are typically funded by property taxes, lower-income neighborhoods generate less money for public schools. With black ghettoization, which we'll get into in just a bit, this forces schools serving inner-city students to be more impoverished themselves, creating a feedback loop of destitution. Beyond that, many white parents facing integration chose to leave the public school system altogether. They formed private schools called segregation academies, often with government help, including getting granted tax-exempt status. That didn't end until 1976, but people have attempted to continue this private segregation anyways. Since religious schools are exempt due to the First Amendment, they've used that loophole to create new segregation academies. President Reagan even tried to give back tax-exempt status. Others have used a modicum of integration to get back that status. The charter school system is built from these private schools, and they began specifically to continue segregation, which once again gives white children privileged access to better education, which is exactly what Brown v. Board of Education was trying to rule against. These were direct remnants of Jim Crow, but structural racism has many other factors. Perhaps the biggest economic effect is the way housing has relegated black people to lesser housing. This is a generational problem rooted in several laws and policies. You see, housing is a form of generational wealth. People inherit their parents' estates. It is the greatest determinant of poverty in the U.S., and blacks are disproportionately affected. Private covenants made white-only neighborhoods, which were often encouraged by state and local governments. Though they were ruled unconstitutional in 1948, it took 2 decades before Congress passed the Fair Housing Act to enforce that ruling. This meant huge amounts of houses were segregated, and it'll take many more years to correct, even now. Federal policy began its housing discrimination during the Great Depression. The National Housing Acts of 1934 and 37 created government-backed mortgages. Through these loans, they could encourage local policy, which often meant creating racial covenants. On top of that, they rated areas for worthiness of mortgages. Marked in red were the places least worthy of a home loan, making approval extremely difficult for people from those areas. These red-lined areas were overwhelmingly marked by race, leaving blacks in the inner cities unable to escape. This created a cycle of poverty, since black people couldn't get those government-backed mortgages like the rest of society. This continued into the housing boom following World War II. when Veterans Administration loans, or VA home loans, followed this redlined model, limiting the benefits of black veterans and how much they could take advantage of the post-war economy. The GI Bill also disadvantaged blacks from college enrollment, shunting them to historically black schools overstressed by the influx of students. Education is a key factor in financial ascendancy and stability, after all. Lower-income neighborhoods mean there's less funding for public K-12 education. That means matriculation to higher education gets shunted to historically black colleges, and they cannot bring back that wealth to their ghettoized communities. See this feedback loop of destitution? It's founded in racist policies, even when they're no longer explicit. Despite the golden age of capitalism, black people were largely left out of it, leaving an intergenerational gap. Even once redlining finally ceased to be enforced in the 1960s, the economic effects remain today, and banks still often reinforce these long-defunct policies, thereby keeping black people in a subservient economic class. As inner cities concentrated more and more black families due to redlining, white people left in droves, worsening the issue. As suburbs became more and more common, racial covenants often made huge swaths into all-white neighborhoods. The burbs were lovely escapes from the city, and with more black people moving into those cities, white flight to the suburbs continued apace. This left blacks ghettoized, unable to escape the inner city because of redlining, segregated by anti-miscegenation, and kept from the suburbs by racial covenants. Yet for even the black folks who managed to buy a house in the city, their troubles were not over. City officials saw these black neighborhoods as blighted. Ghettos became a target for improvement projects. As early as the Great Depression, master planners used eminent domain to dispossess black homeowners. For instance, Robert Moses redesigned New York with highways and parks from the 1930s and 50s. He prioritized cars rather than public transport, and it did rejuvenate the city, but at the cost of predominantly black neighborhoods. This process continues today as ghettos are targets of gentrification schemes, where big corporations buy up cheap real estate in order to create upscale shops and housing. Gentrification may help cities economically, but it further displaces blacks. Because of these deplorable conditions, a series of race riots happened in urban ghettos throughout the mid-1960s, mostly related to police brutality, beginning with Harlem in 1964. They were disenchanted with the failure of the civil rights movement to gain economic mobility. People felt helpless, so they lashed out. By 1967, there were riots nationwide in what was called the Long Hot Summer. The following year, nationwide riots erupted again because of the assassination of Martin Luther King. Though he had denounced rioting on numerous occasions, he'd also argued that it was a phenomenon to be understood with compassion.
I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the economic plight of the Negro poor has worsened. My hope is that it will be nonviolent. I would hope that we can avoid riots because riots are self-defeating and socially destructive.
Well, after so many riots, which had killed more than 200 Americans between 1964 and 68, the government wasn't compassionate any longer. So, in the 1968 Civil Rights Act, Congress included the Civil Obedience Act, more commonly known as the Anti-Riot Act, which made traveling across state lines to supposedly incite riots a federally enforced felony. As though that wasn't targeted enough discrimination, President Nixon campaigned on law and order in 1968.
But in a system of government that provides for peaceful change, there is no cause that justifies resort to violence.
Building and protecting wealth.
I'm going to show you that part, but I'm going to take you to another video, and I'll come back to his video. But you think that was something? You got some black people that I call Sambo mentality, have this mindset that pick yourself by hearing something like that. Pick yourself by your bootstrap. And you're going to see this person, and it's going to piss you off. By Professor Black Truth.
Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
There's some people that were talking about reparations in this country. They wanted reparations. And I remember I made this particular liberal so angry at me because I told them right to their face, nobody owes you anything for slavery. If you want to tell the truth about it, it is you who owes. It's you who owes. Why do you owe? Because somebody in those fields took stripes for you. Somebody after those fields were ended and slavery was ended, somebody had to walk through Jim Crow for you. Somebody fought wars and died for you. Somebody lived less than because they didn't have what you have, and they did it for you. There are people in their graves right now, and they are there because they were willing to stand up and fight for you. Those folks on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, carrying American flags, take that, Colin Kaepernick. Living in a society that he could scarcely acknowledge, something that he has never known, living with a bigotry that none of us can imagine. Carried American flags on that bridge, and when they were hit upside the head with nightsticks and shot with water hoses and knocked to the ground, they got up and picked those flags up and kept marching. And they did it for you. Nobody owes you anything. If anybody owes, it's you. Because you've been the benefactor of freedom. You are the one that owes.
This is Mark Robinson. He's currently the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, and he's trying to ride the coon train all the way to the governor's mansion. He's got a history of saying stupid stuff, and it looks like he's going for a personal best. When I saw this clip, I laughed, like you did when he said that the people talking about reparations, they're the ones who owe. Somebody should tell stupid that in order to owe, first you have to have received something illegitimately, or the person would have to have done something that requires them to make recompense to somebody. So, what have we ever received? This country gave millions of acres of free land to people who were white, gave free government education to people classified as white, housing at extremely low rates, new housing funded by government money in the suburbs just for them, low-interest business loans, and a potpourri of other goodies, giveaways, and guarantees set aside for those classified as white. And what have we done that requires us to make recompense to anybody? Who have we enslaved? Who did we discriminate against? Who did we segregate? Who did we bar from the formal opportunities that exist? Whose churches were we firebombing? Whose neighborhoods did we destroy? To say nothing of the white supremacist mobs who were allowed to kill entire towns full of black people and not be punished. The black people who Robinson was screaming about, saying that we owe them, they were the ones who were marching for reparations.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Those black people who Robinson was lying about, they were the ones trying to get us reparations, and we're continuing the struggle that they began.
Right.
So that's what we're doing, reminding America that they owe us. But just understand, this is who the political parties like to see, both the left and the right, because we are owed, and we will collect. And I'm sure it's very easy to dismiss this Robinson clown, because he is ridiculous on his face. When you have someone who's the loudest and the wrongest in the room, it's difficult to take him seriously. But he knows he's running a finesse. He knows that the novelty of a black man screaming anti-black talking points is like catnip for the mental midgets who comprise the Republican Party base. The Republican Party is not a political party. It's nothing more than a joint chorus of phony outrage and complaints over wrongs that were never done to them. Their only policy, if it can be called that, is indulging phony white grievance. Since the blowhards on Fox News and the white right-wing radio shows set the tone for what the GOP has to do to get attention from their perverted, degenerate base, they're competing with each other to see who can out-crazy the other crazies, who can outdo the other in terms of shameless racism. This Robinson fool knows exactly who he's playing to. They used to want alternative facts, but at this point they don't even want alternative facts anymore, they just want pure fantasy. This guy listed all the things from slavery to Jim Crow that white racists have done against black people in this country, and you know that audience of KKK alumni he was talking to were loving taking that stroll down memory lane. If Robinson wants to talk about all the black people who were killed for trying to assert their basic rights, hell, the people he was talking to in that audience in all likelihood were some of the perpetrators. All the things he listed are the things they're proud of. Don't think he didn't know that, by the way. And then he took a page right out of John Lewis's playbook, saying that when those racists knocked down the black civil rights activists, those activists got up, picked up the flag, and kept marching. He talks about black people who were carrying American flags. Yeah, the people that he was talking to in that audience, they revere the Confederate flag. The people he was talking to in that audience were the ones who were attacking those civil rights activists. You can't leave that part of the story out, except that's exactly what he did. Yeah, sounds just like John Lewis and his I Spill Blood in Selma routine. Actually, it sounds more like when John Lewis said that he actually thanked the racist police thugs who assaulted him in the 60s, and even thanked them for their service. So you see that whether it be the white right or the white left, Negroes in both political parties fully understand the tune they better sing if they want to have a chance of the political parties putting them on. One more thing, this fool said that we who are demanding reparations are the ones who owe because we're the benefactors of freedom. See, this is what happens when you and your political party decide to ban books, but then again, if you're a Republican, you don't have to worry about your audience being offended at that prospect. The racists who the GOP caters to can't read, and apparently neither can this Robinson clown, because the word benefactor means someone or something that provides help or an advantage. One that confers a benefit. Well, at the very least, he got that part right, because that definitely describes us to a T. We are the benefactors of freedom. Everything about this country that makes it where people are actually able to enjoy something resembling liberty was directly because of our effort and no one else's. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and everything else. These were not the results of the people like Robinson's trying to cater to. They were the ones who wanted to stonewall freedom. We were the ones who made that possible. The vague, hollow sham of freedom, quote unquote, that America has is directly and owing solely to us. And without us, the little hollow caricature of freedom, quote unquote, that America has wouldn't even exist. Country wouldn't even have that much if it wasn't for us. It was our ancestor, Crispus Attucks, who was the first person to die in the events leading up to the Revolutionary War. The first casualty of the American Revolution was one of ours. It is the dominant society who owes us and has never paid. They owe for every war we took part in, without which they would have no nation and no freedom. The vast majority of those people who applauded Robinson, they had no ancestors who were even in the United States until the late 19th century. And they didn't come here to build wealth. The wealth already existed. They came across the oceans to take advantage of what was already here, what we had already created. They owe us for centuries of uncompensated labor that built the prosperity that they've enjoyed and didn't have to work for. They owe us for the century and a half that our tax dollars have gone to bootstrap their settlements, their townships, and their suburbs. Look it up. Black dollars from the inner city paid for the suburbs. Because of all the uncompensated labor that black people gave to this country, the biggest contribution of labor that we made was working to try to create some sort of hollow shell of something resembling freedom, something resembling liberty, something resembling democracy. This country owes us for the centuries of uncompensated labor that built the prosperity and the sham of freedom that this nation's non-black citizens enjoy and didn't have to work for. They owe for every time that they stood in the way of progress, from Jim Crow to segregation to the lynchings to the civil rights marches to today. We are owed for every drop of innocent black blood that was spilled, in our efforts to try to make this country resemble something like civilization. This Robinson fool doesn't mention the 4 little black girls burned to death in the 16th Street Baptist Church. He doesn't mention the Freedom Riders whose buses were firebombed. He doesn't mention all the lynchings. He doesn't mention Emmett Till. He only mentioned the people who suffered, but he didn't mention the people who died, certainly not by name. He didn't give us that rundown of the fatalities because that doesn't fit his lying narrative. Because if he started saying those names, he would have to go, a lot of y'all applaud me right now. It turns out y'all do owe. He knows the kind of lies he's got to tell if he wants that room full of racists to even consider voting for him. And I guess he figures that because his little hustle was sufficient to get him to the lieutenant governor's position, a little bit more bootlicking with a little extra spit, and why he could get the top slot. This is how low you gotta stoop if you want the Republican Party to consider you for office. This is how low you gotta go. And by the way, isn't it interesting how these bootlicking, butt-kissing, blowhard sellouts like David Clark and this Robinson clown are constantly talking about how black people have nothing to be angry about, but every time you see them, all they do is scream and yell and tell people that they're angry about what black people are demanding. These guys are the angriest people in the room.
Right.
We know that it's all performative, though. They're putting on a show. When you look at Mark Robinson, you're seeing someone who's auditioning for a job. He knows that any old white candidate who comes along can easily knock him aside with a flick of their finger. So he has to do this. Grovel, beg, get on his hands and knees, lie about black people's history for the amusement of a putrid gang of prejudiced bigots.
Right.
This is what happens when you're a bootlick. You can't have any self-respect.
Right.
That's the first thing that's gotta go. And you can't tell the truth either. You don't care about black people's struggle or history because you're only looking out for yourself.
Exactly.
On the right, you pretend that the racism never existed, or if it ever did, it was a long time ago, and if it exists today, then it must be the Democrats or Antifa or BLM, or anyone except for the GOP who gets caught week after week reminiscing about lynching black people like the degenerates in McCurtain County, Oklahoma did. And I'll be here till 3 in the morning listing them all. On the left side of the ledger, the bootlicks talk about how important everyone else's issues are, and how important it is to do things for everybody except for black people. And they go on Twitter, in public, and make speeches where they openly invite everyone to ride on the coattails of our history and our suffering, saying that, well, what these people who showed up 5 minutes ago, their little minor complaints, why, that's just like Dr. King, that's just like the Freedom Riders. We have a unique history and a unique moral legitimacy. And we cannot allow everybody to decide that they're going to co-opt or otherwise lay claim to our history and try to palm themselves off as being the inheritors of our legacy. That is a historical fraud, and we cannot allow it. Nobody else was enslaved except for us. Nobody else had to endure the black codes or any sort of racial codes except for us.
Yeah.
Nobody else had gangs of white supremacist marauders going from coast to coast burning down their townships except for us. Nobody else was systematically told you cannot have any sort of justice for these wrongs done against you except for us. Nobody else was targeted with everything from poll taxes to literacy tests, which were nothing more than caprice for any racist poll officer to say you can't vote. Nobody else was targeted like that except for us.
Well,
and
sure.
now we got people who have been engaging in a nonstop parade of claiming that their minor complaints are somehow comparable to our monumental oppression that's been going on from day one. I don't think so. Now, the white right is not crazy. They are indulgent, though. That's why people like this Mark Robinson fool put on the performances for them. These are not people who are concerned about the real issues that ought to concern them. After all, this country has handed them every crumb of their daily bread. They've been given everything they could ever want. Why should they worry? And now they want someone to assure them that they will freeze the world the way that it was, so that they never have to compete, because that's what terrifies them the most. That's the devil's bargain that white supremacy made with those classified as white. There will be no competition, especially not from black people. After 500 years of having everything handed to them and being glorified in the media and lauded by politicians, social scientists, corporations, and even clergy for no reason, when someone threatens to make them actually have to earn a living, well, they're not going to take that very well. The cottage industry and bootlicks for the white right is shrinking, but these chumps haven't cultivated any other skill set, so they have to bootlick. Michael Steele was talking similar claptrap for the brief instant that he was RNC chairman. Not as vitriolic as this goofball, but he was still doing it. And now he's on MSNBC trashing the GOP daily. Bootlicks aren't hired guns, they're hired tongues. They will lick whatever boot that they think will give them the most money. And why is this Mark Robinson chump running against reparations in the first place? Because, like Ron DeSantis down in Florida, his handlers have told him this is a movement that's in the ascendancy, so you gotta do something about it regardless. This is a top priority. If you win higher office, that's fine, but you gotta take this one on regardless. Doesn't matter if it even costs you everything. You've probably seen that lately, reparations has been trending on Twitter regularly. Somebody, Republican donors to be sure, see this as a threat. They got their people online just like the Democrats do. They monitor things like Twitter just to see what's trending. When they saw this, oh, I'm sure they were fit to be tied. Now, of course, the white supremacists are super ultra hypersensitive to anything that even remotely resembles a possible threat, much less challenge. So they react to things that aren't even dangerous to them. But in this case, they sent this buffoon out front and he's trying to be the candidate of anti-reparations. And he's running against us, is what that means. Now, when's the last time that I saw someone whining that people demanding reparations was dangerous and that they shouldn't be listened to? Oh, that's right, Joy Reid, when she had that stupid segment with Shireen Mitchell a few years back, attacking us as being Russian bots. And what was the rationale for this attack? Because we merely demand what we're owed. So you see that both the white right and the white left bring out their Negro sock puppets to attack our interests. They cannot lead the charge on that one themselves, so they have to get the bootleg flunkies to do it for them. That's how their con works. They get some bootleg who they've got on their payroll, and then they put them on a TV station that they paid for, or at a political rally that they paid for. And the bootleg attacks black people, and then they come along and pretend like, oh, you know, I just couldn't help but hear what it was he was saying about what you niggers need to do, and I was just happened to be within earshot. You know what? Since people are talking about it, I just have to throw in my 2 cents, buddy. That's what they do. That's what the bootleg does for them. Lays the groundwork for them to go ahead and butt in because that's what they want from the get-go. So we're seeing a concerted effort to undermine reparations, and it's happening because we're going into another election cycle. This shows you how much of a problem that at least the Republican Party consider reparations to be as a political issue. And they're attacking the people who are advocating for it, but you know who they weren't attacking? They're not attacking do-nothing groups led by Big Bird. He's a safe Negro. He gets put on TV or what have you because he's going to do white power's bidding. That's what he's there for. Now, the last sighting of Big Bird was when he was flapping his wings in Nashville for those 2 Democratic Party plants. He was supporting their little publicity stunt. And as fate would have it, 2 days ago, MSNBC had this empty sack of feathers back on. That's 2 times now that MSNBC has had this guy on, not because of anything he did, but merely because he was standing next to someone who had allegedly done something newsworthy. Now, the segment was on Ari Melber's show. Ari Melber, or as I like to call him, the king of cringe. He's not a total dumpster fire, but he is the most corny white anchorman on TV. He is so mega cringe when he constantly drops rap lyrics into his show for no real reason, which, by the way, he never does with any other group or at any other time. It's only black people that he seems to think worthy of deciding that he's going to be dropping some Jay-Z lyrics in there or what have you. He makes it where whenever it comes time to talk about politics, well, let's go ahead and make it silly. This is more of that get your booty to the polls stuff. That's the well he draws from. He obviously thinks that it makes him sound hip or like he's down with black people, but it makes him seem like he's trying his hand at comedy and it's not working. And his regular appearances on the Breakfast Schlubs don't help him. Does he think it gives him street cred? I don't know how. All people see is that he's a corny anchor on MSNBC and the Breakfast Schlubs are a bunch of bootlicking tools. Ari Melber comes off as a less obnoxious version of Bill Maher. Just because he hasn't pulled the same mess as Maher and gone overboard taking liberties with our history and our culture doesn't mean that he won't do it. That train is never late. Now, the reason that Melber had Big Bird on in the first place was not to talk to him. It was because there was a rapper who had made a song about police brutality. So why the hell was Big Bird even there? He didn't make the video, he didn't produce it. Hell, he wasn't even a backup singer on the track. So why was he even there? It's because the black grassroots are talking. And the white media's attempts to try to prop up some new black frontmen isn't going over like they thought it would. They're getting considerable pushback, and they know who it's coming from. So the only thing that they can do is the same thing, just more of it. Let's go ahead and put Big Bird on more often because the last 5 or 6 times we had him on worked out so well. As for Ari Milber, he's just trying to increase his own viewership by appealing to the very young black people who creeps like Joke Reed and clowns like Jonathan Capehart and Tiffany Cross ran off. But you won't be surprised to know that during this very segment, not a word was said about reparations, not by Ari Milber and certainly not by Big Bird. So this is what your so-called head of the alleged nation's oldest reparations advocacy group did when he was on MSNBC. He says nothing about reparations. He didn't so much as breathe the word reparations when he was on Joy Reid's show 2 weeks ago, and didn't dare say it when he was on Ari Milber's show 2 days ago. So what does that tell you? What that tells you is this is the reason the white media even puts his raggedy behind on TV. So much for your reparations advocate, right? Family, whenever you talk about the systematic racism that we face, we have to make sure that reparations comes up time and again. We gotta actually say that word. We have to remind people that the American police came out of the old slave catchers. Remind people that the KKK had a large police membership and that their various spin-off groups still do. We have to stop being bashful about saying reparations. That word makes all these other people scared and nervous because they know they owe us. And we have to make it a point to get comfortable with making other people uncomfortable. Because their comfort has come at the cost of our comfort, our well-being, and our lives. Well, I've got news for Ari Milber, Joy Reid, and the rest of the empty suits over at MSNBC. They can go ahead and put that guy on all they want. Hell, they can go ahead and give him a show. He's already got a radio show that nobody listens to. Why not a TV show that nobody watches? The reason this guy doesn't move the needle no matter how much TV exposure he gets is because people don't take him seriously. Because the black media has already educated them about exactly who and what this guy is. The white media sees how every time Big Bird leaves Sesame Street to go chase the cameras, he gets clowned by the new black media. The white media is trying to prop up their tools, put them on this or that show, and hopefully give them some instant credibility, except these white media stations...
I'm going to stop it right here, but he's absolutely right. And I got a suggestion for Mr. Robinson. In the end, you're going to find out that don't pay to be a Sambo for your masters. But anyway, but I had to show you the white guy, so we're gonna go back to another his video.
Hey, Safer here. This is another one of my U.S. history lectures meant for my college courses.
That backs up his
I've touched
video.
up the audio and made it a little easier to listen to, and today we're going to be talking about one of the worst parts of American history, Jim Crow. This lecture is sponsored by viewers like you and CuriosityStream. They are a documentary streaming service with loads of content on all kinds of subjects, from science to history and society. Jim Crow is a difficult subject to say the least, and this lecture doesn't really end on a good note, but Curiosity has a great documentary to follow up on. One public figure is most associated with the end of Jim Crow, and that's Martin Luther King. He was perhaps the most prominent leader of the civil rights movement. Beginning in 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott, he led numerous protests that were instrumental to bringing about the end of Jim Crow. Furthermore, he instilled a philosophy into the movement of nonviolent resistance.
This is a non-violent protest. We are depending on moral and spiritual forces, using the method of passive resistance.
Founded on the transcendental ideal of civil disobedience. This was instrumental in forcing Congress to pass the Civil and Voting Rights Acts, which ultimately undid so much of Jim Crow. And King never stopped fighting to end the inequality left over from that system, all the way until his assassination in Memphis. CuriosityStream has an excellent couple of episodes following King through this process. It stitches together so much great archival footage, so you can follow him, as the subtitle says, from Montgomery to Memphis. And there is much more on their platform. If you go to the link below, which is curiositystream.com/cynicalhistorian, and enter the code cynicalhistorian, you'll get an entire year on their streaming service for just $14.99 US. And it's a great service. Anyway, on with the show. Jim Crow refers to a time of greatly increased discrimination across the United States. While it began in the South, it certainly was not limited to that region. While the greatest war in American history ended slavery, the following Reconstruction failed to institute civil rights. But they were still in fact the law of the land following Reconstruction. It took time for them to fall apart. Jim Crow is a colloquialism for a broad batch of discriminatory laws passed as the civil rights of Reconstruction began to wane. They were not a single set, but highly variable, ranging from disenfranchisement to segregation, all designed to reinstitute white supremacy and chastise black people into fully subordinated status. Even the name derives from a minstrel show character displayed on screen. These shows caricatured black people, popularizing the racist deceit that blacks are inferior. Jim Crow is not a static entity. Discrimination changed and morphed over time, starting as de facto, as in outside of the law, and moving to de jure, as in the law itself, even moving back to de facto to reinforce de jure Jim Crow. This interplay between de facto and de jure discrimination is important for understanding how history is not an ever-flowing progressive movement. It can experience regression. Redeemer Democrats redeemed the South by making this steady and dynamic buildup. It was not a static form of oppression, but one that had to claw back civil rights. And they did so with one great fear of white supremacists: the idea of Negro rule. During Reconstruction, while moderate and radical Republicans fought for civil rights, many black people were able to secure office during this time. And so white supremacists depicted any kind of black advancement as an attack on white people. The picture shown here is fear-mongering about a fusion party in North Carolina who managed to win a local election in Wilmington in 1898. Following this fear-mongering, a mob of white supremacists attacked downtown Wilmington, massacred numerous black people, and took control of local office. It is perhaps the only successful coup d'etat in American history. This fear of Negro rule led to numerous massacres like that, and it is part of what Redeemer Democrats used to gain back control of the South. Even before 1877 and the official end of Reconstruction, military enforcement of civil rights steadily fell throughout the 1870s, and as such, Redeemer Democrats gained more and more control of the South. To attack white Republicans, they labeled them carpetbaggers and scalawags. Carpetbaggers meant Northerners coming south. Stereotypically, they would supposedly carry a carpet bag full of money in order to take advantage of the downed economy after the Civil War. But the term was applied to any Northerners coming south, and scalawag referred to any Southerner who voted for the party of the North, which at this point were the Republicans. Republicans were the liberals of this time. In fact, in 1872, a breakaway party called the Liberal Republicans formed specifically because they thought the actual Republican Party was too radical, whereas Redeemer Democrats wanted to redeem the South by recreating and conserving the antebellum South, when slavery was still legal. Keep in mind that Republicans were overwhelmingly liberals during this time frame, and Democrats conservatives, quite the opposite of today. By 1876, the Democrats had managed to take over the entire South, forming what was known as the Solid South, and basically making it impossible for Republicans to run in the South for decades to come. The region became known as the Solid South because it was essentially a one-party system, completely controlled by ultra-conservative or reactionary Democrats. The Democrats had an explicitly racist agenda, and so many black people saw the writing on the wall, leaving the South in droves for Kansas in a group called the Exodusters. Around 40,000 total left for greener pastures. But how the Democrats cemented their rule was not simply through the ballot. It was through white supremacist terrorism. Following the defeat of the first Ku Klux Klan, two major white supremacist groups formed to take up the slack that was left once the first Klan had been defeated. The White League formed in 1874 and the Red Shirts in 1875, and they used violence and intimidation in order to make sure that black people, carpetbaggers, and scalawags did not vote. Though the White League officially went underground in 1876, they went by many other names after that, and the Red Shirts were still around for decades to come. In fact, they were the ones who attacked Wilmington in 1898. This had its intended effect, and and Democrats solidified their rule of the South through this violence and intimidation. But on the national stage, Democrats could not be so openly white supremacist. While Reconstruction had failed, leaving a disdain to enforce civil rights, Republicans could always use Redeemer Democrats' denial of civil rights as means to score political points. So Democrats formed the opposition party, while Republicans controlled the rest of the country. So on the national stage, Democrats became what were called bourbon Democrats. They were still quite conservative compared to Republicans, but because Republicans were so pro-business during a time of immense corruption, they called for anti-corruption legislation and isolationism, the former of which we would often consider progressive today. But the racial politics never really left the bourbon Democrats. They still had a Redeemer constituency, and would use the fear of Negro rule in order to pass their anti-corruption legislation. To reinforce all of this ideologically, the lost cause myth arose. It tried to apologize for the Confederacy through open denial of its racist cause, and as with so many other forms of historical denialism, ultimately wished to submit to white supremacy. Its four tenets are that slavery was somehow good for slaves, the war itself was not about slavery, and was simply Northern aggression, and that Reconstruction was not about civil rights, but the North trying to punish the South. These are all, in fact, incorrect, but the sum total of the myth cemented Southern identity, as though the antebellum order was wholesome and worth preservation, despite the fact that the antebellum order included slavery. And that myth ultimately justified black disenfranchisement. The franchise refers to one's ability to vote, and in order to enact greater racial discrimination, the people who they hoped to discriminate against would have to be made to not vote. There was, of course, de facto disenfranchisement, as in when white supremacist terrorists attacked and intimidated black voters away from the polls. But this steadily turned to de jure disenfranchisement, as in laws that specifically targeted black people, even though the laws themselves were depicted as colorblind, so as to skirt around the strictures of the 15th Amendment, which specifically states that citizens have the right to vote and cannot be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But the South came up with crafty ways to target black people despite not officially doing so. The most common of these was the poll tax, which required people to pay money in order to vote. While poor white people certainly existed, former slaves were far more poverty-stricken, and oftentimes people who were collecting this tax would change the price of admission simply on the basis of whether or not the voter was black or white. So though it was a completely colorblind law, it was anything but in practice. The same happened with literacy tests, where voters were required to show proficiency in reading and writing in order to gain the franchise. Up until emancipation, most slaves were disallowed by law from learning how to read, and it takes time in order to learn how. So there was that systemic way, but once again there were also individuals who would give more stern tests to black people rather than whites. And finally, there was registration by referral, as in one could only register to vote if another person who already had the vote gave them a referral. Of course, many blacks had not gotten into the system, and a lot of white voters refused to refer them. Georgia was the first to pass all of these voting restrictions, exactly as soon as Reconstruction ended in 1877. And these limits on suffrage quickly spread across the South. Many states found that even when they gave so many easy ways for whites to pass literacy tests and poll taxes over black citizens, large amounts still were disenfranchised. And so they created what were called grandfather clauses, as in if one's grandfather could vote, they did not need to pay a tax or pass a literacy test or have a referral to register. Of course, most black people in the late 19th century had grandparents who were slaves and therefore ineligible to vote. This created an insular system that kept black people from voting despite the laws not being openly racist. Of course, in Mississippi, they were the first to pass an openly racist law in 1884 that barred black people from juries. That way, if they tried to sue in order to gain the vote, an all-white jury would hear their case and be more than likely to say that black people did not qualify. This too spread across the South fairly quickly, but none of this could stand if the Supreme Court had upheld the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Instead, they sneakily invalidated the Reconstruction Amendments. In 1883, the Supreme Court heard 5 cases and ultimately ruled that Congress did not have the power to outlaw racial discrimination by private individuals. So if there were individuals who were making limits on suffrage more onerous on black people, that could not be outlawed. Hence why Mississippi, only a year later, outlawed black people from serving on juries. This was essentially a sign from the highest court in the land, saying we will not enforce civil rights. That was not officially overturned until 1968. And another landmark case came in 1896 with Plessy v. Ferguson, which claimed that separation was not discrimination, meaning that white people could be separated from black people and still somehow be kept equal, hence coining the phrase separate but equal. And that would not be overturned until 1954, so the Supreme Court had essentially invalidated civil rights. Soon many states ratified new constitutions in order to solidify disenfranchisement, Mississippi once again being the first in 1890. From then on, they could proclaim that it was a state's right to practice this form of discrimination. Since it was within their own state constitutions, they had proclaimed that it was the state's right to discriminate. For civil rights are ultimately a right to avoid discrimination. According to these state constitutions, state rights were superior to civil rights, and they used this de jure disenfranchisement in order to implement de jure segregation. Segregation simply means to separate, to set groups apart, and in the South, that meant separating black and white people. Remember from Plessy v. Ferguson that the Supreme Court had said separate can be equal, even though it almost never was in practice. And this differential status began long before disenfranchisement was fully implemented. For many former slaves, they had to turn to sharecropping instead of enslavement. Essentially what sharecropping is when a landowner allows a tenant to farm on their land, giving a certain share of that crop in order to pay for debts owed. White people were often sharecroppers as well in order to pay off debts, but the system was particularly rigged against black people. Black farmers often couldn't make enough to not keep getting increasingly into debt, and therefore having to share more and more of their crops. And of course, white landowners would keep interest rates high for black people as opposed to white people, essentially reinventing debt peonage. Segregated schooling also predated de jure disenfranchisement. Most schools were private in the mid-19th century, but by the late 19th century, even public schools had been segregated by race. Segregation meant that white people got better facilities. Even though schools were supposed to adhere to the principle of separate but equal, in practice, black schools received less funding, and these other Jim Crow laws guaranteed the teachers and officials who worked at these segregated institutions would be far less qualified. Inequality at schools duplicated inequalities throughout society and perpetuated black subjugation for generations. The most visible form of segregation came in public spaces, where you would have accommodations meant for everyone, segregated with clear signs saying white and colored. And as you can see in this photo, they often made no attempt to make it separate but equal. To compound this oppression, states and municipalities passed vagrancy laws. This made it illegal to be out at night, loitering around without work, or just looking like a vagrant. Often being unemployed as a black man assured a prison sentence. Prisons, especially in the South, practiced what is called convict leasing, as in convicts were leased to nearby businesses, farmers, and other kinds of employers in order to labor for the lesser cost than it would be for non-convicts. Many states throughout the late 19th to mid-20th century did not pay the convicts any of the money made from their own labor. It was merely a benefit to the state. Even in social spaces, segregation laws enforced the color line. The word miscegenation simply means race mixing. So in many states throughout the Union, It was illegal for people of different races to marry, cohabitate, copulate, or even be in a room together for longer than a day. These anti-miscegenation laws were not unique to the South, although they remained in the South for much longer, all the way until 1967 in some cases. In order to enforce all of this de jure segregation, much of it slipped into de facto segregation. The fear of miscegenation especially led to a great deal of lynching. If a black man was seen to be even just a little bit too friendly with a white woman, he might be found hanging from a tree the following night. While lynching in the United States had been commonplace on the frontier since at least the late 18th century, and had always disproportionately targeted racial minorities, during Jim Crow, it took on an especially racist demeanor. Communities openly celebrated lynchings that specifically targeted black people for crossing the racial line in any way. Another de facto form of segregation was through housing covenants, as in houses were sold specifically stating that they could not be sold to black people, relegating black people to certain neighborhoods. The federal government perpetuated this during the New Deal. They backed mortgages, making home loans more accessible to lower-income Americans, but certain neighborhoods were marked as too high of risk. This practice is called redlining, and the areas redlined were typically all black neighborhoods, essentially turning inner cities into black ghettos and perpetuating the systemic racism of Jim Crow well past its end. And how all of this white supremacy was reinforced was through the Lost Cause myth. By the early 20th century, it was not merely a Southern idea, but had spread throughout the entire United States, since it proclaimed that slavery was good for the slave, and all that Civil War and Reconstruction stuff was merely Northern aggression. In order to conserve the antebellum South, it promoted social separation, as in segregation. The Lost Cause myth was integral to Jim Crow, and one of the main ways of promoting it was through statues, showing off the loyalty and gallantry of Confederate figures and declaring that the antebellum social order was something worth preserving. A group called the United Daughters of the Confederacy were especially prevalent in this regard, to the point of even creating their own school textbooks in order to promote the Lost Cause. But one figure brought it to the public more than anyone else, and that man's name was Woodrow Wilson. During his time as president, he would bring the U.S. to what is often referred to as the nadir of American race relations, as in the lowest point. He was the first Southerner to be elected President of the United States since before the Civil War. Though Andrew Johnson had been a Southerner, he wasn't elected president, he was elected vice president, only coming to office because of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and Andrew Johnson's presidency is not well regarded. One of the first things that Woodrow Wilson did as president was allow his cabinet to segregate the federal government. Federal employment had been one of the safe havens for black people, a place where they could regularly find employment, even if discrimination within the workplace was never particularly great. Even before he had come to the presidency, he had played a key role in legitimizing the Lost Cause. He was a historian, a rabidly racist one, but a prominent enough one to become president of Princeton prior to becoming the president of the United States, and he would later become the president of the American Historical Association. Through his writings, he legitimized the Lost Cause. During his presidency, he made a spectacle in 1914 to dedicate a Confederate statue in Arlington Cemetery, but his worst legitimation of the Lost Cause came in 1915, with the release of a movie called The Birth of a Nation. It was based on a supposedly true story written by a former roommate of Woodrow Wilson's named Thomas Dixon. Dixon and Wilson were very close friends, and so when the movie adaptation came, Wilson was happy to promote it. In fact, within the movie itself, the director, D.W. Griffith, went out of his way to extensively quote Woodrow Wilson. And as you can see here, Wilson was quite the promoter of the Lost Cause myth. So Wilson, of course, played the movie in the White House, the first movie to have ever done so, and it quickly became Hollywood's first blockbuster. Though the numbers are hard to grasp, it made approximately $5 million in rentals, as in the movie theaters that rent it. Box office revenue would not be counted for years to come. By some calculations, that would still make The Birth of a Nation Hollywood's most profitable movie ever. And of course,
I'm gonna stop it right here. Um, but you see, it's American history that they don't want the young people to understand. That's why they're trying to ban it in all 50 states, because it's the stuff that the clinical historian is bringing out. And the reason why they use Mr. Robertson is to counteract that. Even though Mr. Robertson would be considered like a big black buck for him. And and they were rewarding really good if to keep the masses of black people, derange them off of the topic of reparations. But I got news for those subconscious racist people who send people like Robertson and other black people. And I got a message for you. Just like in the days of Egypt, when Moses was in the land, Egypt still got punished. Egypt got punished for 400 years. America, you're going to get punished. And if I could say any black people like Mr. Robertson, step out the way. Let the Most High, because he gonna whoop they behind. The white supremacy that lingers on throughout the United States. That's why I Go Black to Africa said, "Damn America," because of what you just see. So they can deny and do what they want to do. And as in black people, if they don't, just don't get mad if they're gonna keep denying and they're gonna keep reflecting. We ain't gonna give you. That's what the pharaohs told the Hebrews. We ain't giving you nothing. We ain't gonna let you go out there and worship by yourself. In fact, we're gonna take some people to watch over you. That's what they did to the Hebrews. But when God called Moses to get his people by there, and he put a spirit on the Pharaoh to hold them back, and when the Pharaohs got to their senses, they tried to come after the Hebrews. And what happened to the Egyptians? They were wiped out. The ones that had that mindset that tried to so we're gonna go back and we're gonna kill them and put them in bondage. So I got this is a message for the direct racists as well as the racists. Your time is up. Your time is up. And you see the plagues that hitting the land, and you see places like Mississippi, the weather patterns, and the corruption. God's gonna clean up the United States because of stuff like this. You ain't gonna be able to dance and haul around off the ground. And then that's not just in the southern states, in some northern states too, in Midwestern states. America, you in for a rude, and we've been trying to tell you. We're not telling you that. We're not telling out hatred, because black people don't have the hatred. But there's a God in heaven that made all of us has got tired and got fed up. And injustice, what you've done, you put it in the laws, and you deny the people what is due to them. That you put them through the most horrendous denigration in the history of the world. Was the people, or the majority that look like my ancestors. That's right. You don't have to, but be aware. Be aware. The ones that object to the reparations. Watch when the plagues, more plagues are coming. If the Egyptians can come back to this day, they will probably warn you. If Rome can come back to this day, they will probably warn you. Because when they did not only abominations, not only the abominations that you've done in this land to take an innocent life of all walks of life, but the injustice that have you done. You don't think you're not going to pay? Oh, you're going to pay one way or the other. You're going to pay, and you can't, and it's not going. You're not going to be able to use a Mr. Robertson that put a black man before God. Oh no. I say, if you're a black person and try to be like that, I suggest you step out the way and let the Most High deal with the white supremacists, the in the closet ones. Don't take a whooping for them. Don't vouch for them. It's time for them to get that 450 year busted up. And the Bidens of the world, the DeSantis of the world, don't worry about that. And it doesn't matter if an opinion like a Dr. Phil, it doesn't matter. They're gonna see what they've done to our people. And then you try to use some of our people to derail and derange. They're gonna see. You can only keep with people in which you've done so long. You owe us. You know you do. But you want to keep hiding, denying. Just like the Hebrews during the Egyptian days. They owe, but eventually they paid up. And you know what happened when they didn't pay up? You've seen the plagues that happened. You don't think America's going through some plagues? You don't think viruses is coming? You don't think world disasters is coming to separate its people? You just don't. You must don't read your Bible too well. You think you're gonna be well. That was just back then. Oh no, because God said it's nothing new up under the sun. The Most High said it's nothing new up under the sun. So they paid for it in the days of the ancient Hebrews, even though that they did everything and committed adultery and did missed over the commandments after they got their form of reparation. But Egypt was left with a standing of remnants. So it's something to think about. So to anybody, regardless of race, color, even if someone's ain't been in this country with that kind of mindset, you're gonna see. You can mock us, you can laugh at us, you don't think you can think that we're the lowest. But it doesn't matter. Because you can't help what's going on right now. Look around you. Look at disasters that hit America. Just like it's some disasters hitting other parts of the world, but look America. Look what the tornadoes and the floods have caused. And when the hurricanes come in June, all those coastlines was ex-slave ports, and they go hit in them areas from New York all the way down, wherever them slaves were dropped off at. You've been warned. But Biden and all them other ones, whether they Democrat or Republican, is going to put you in the midst of the judgment. Because the judgment was already when you start taking out innocent life, when you took God out of school. The judgment has already hit the land. Only thing, it ain't nothing hold back from the Most High from coming through those clouds at any daytime. We're trying to tell you. But you don't believe it. But you see the signs. Oh, great fear is coming. It ain't nothing that no man can do, no black man, no white man, no red man, no nothing. It's another one who made every man on this planet. And what you done to the black man, the black woman, child, you gonna pay. Believe that. Believe that. You gonna pay. You gonna pay in this life, and you gonna have to see it in the afterlife. And you scared. You should be scared. The ones who's trying to deny the reparations, you should be scared. Because see, in the bloodline, some of your ancestors were responsible, and you don't want to take accountability. See, no matter if it's someone like a Ron DeSantis, he's somewhere in this. Maybe he might not pay it at some point, but maybe somewhere in his bloodline, after his descendants will, and the ones after him will. Maybe Biden don't think he gonna get away with it, and all these other people. We ain't gonna give you Negroes, blacks, nothing. Okay, keep telling us that. But if the Egyptians and all the ancient civilization can come back and tell you, you're making a big mistake, because most of their remnants is still under the earth, and people 100, 200 or 300 years later still finding out America's heading that direction. And in places all throughout. You see the land is going to a barren land. If you look on every part of those travel guys that travel across the country, look at all the small towns that go into a barren land. Most southern towns were white towns, sundown towns, and they go into barren land. They go into barren land. All those sundown towns, ladies and gentlemen, all those they don't even see it. Just the system, Mississippi. Look how Mississippi's being hit with everything, with the floods, the hurricanes, because the injustice what he's done, and had led to that, in other states like Mississippi. You don't want to do the right thing. You don't. Well, it's just some cup, and you're gonna have the hatred and have that disdain till you walk. When you look in the book of Revelation, you have to look at the beginning and end. And like I said in one video, wait till you have to stand before man that's in bronze and gold, darker than the darkest men with pigmentation on the planet. But you're going to see it in spirit. See, it's not going to be like in the movies. It's not going to be like around the Easter and the Mormon cartoons and all the other ones. That's what they tell you it is. But if you read the book of Revelation, you're going to be looking at the God that made all of us. And you're going to pay. You're going to pay. Mark my word. You're going to pay. And you're going to wish you had paid. You're going to say, what did we do to those people? And you're going to regret this all the way to your generations after you leave this world. It's going to reflect it. See what Ron DeSantis don't know that. Your Joe Biden don't know that. But I hope they live and God let them see it. And so you're going to regret what you've done to my people. To the people. You're not going to use Satan's tactic of puppet master when it comes to black people. Picking parties. It's not that over. And you just sit back and watch. We're going to sit back and watch you go to war with each other. How you like that? How you like that? It's coming. The truth. The young man laid it out, and I had to show up front, so I didn't want to sound like I was being racist, because I had to show the white guy showing the truth, and the black guy's talking, even though you can't see his face. But they both are on truth, and you can't deny it. You're in trouble. America's in trouble. And it's going to be more. And I pray that God will have us covered because of this. This is one of the many things America is under judgment for. This is one of them. It's one of the many things. She don't want to do right. She's like Rome in Egypt. We ain't going to do nothing for the people. They ain't going to give them nothing. In fact, we're going to party and we're going to use them to our own recollection. Well, the black people ain't going to cover you this time. Because someone's going to step out the way and let the Most High deal with you. The God. And he deal with you in his own way. See, God's going to bring down white supremacy from the east to west to north and south in the United States and abroad. Trust me. He's going to bring it to an end. And there's nothing you can do. And if you fight with them, well, you got somebody opposed to the Most High God and His Son. And it's a nice, so softly, hottest place in the imaginable. Your soul will be there for eternity. So, I would do the right thing, but it is what it is. Alright then, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I had to say in this video, but truth is coming out. You can't deny it. We at the end. Look at the patterns. Look at the time we are in. Look how many people live on this planet. Look around you. Reality is right at your door. Alright then, guys. Take it easy. Be blessed till next time.